Hey, this is Chris Wiegand, and you're listening to the Silver Screen Happy Hour. This was one of those extra long happy hours, so we are going to split this into 2 episodes. I'm not going to waste any time up front here. I just want to ask you, if you enjoy our show, please share it with others. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, and let us know what movie you'd like us to cover on a future episode. We're going to start this recording off right.
What do you got there?
I got a Miller High Life. Miller Genuine Draft.
A Miller Genuine Draft, and how does that tie into today's show?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked.
What are we doing anyway?
There's several scenes where a Miller Genuine Draft is being consumed. I think one at the beginning of the movie. I think...
Have we told the audience what movies we're even doing?
No, they looked at the podcast headline.
They
know what's going on.
They know. They read the log line.
So we're going to be talking about Bonnie and Clyde and True Romance. True Romance is one of my favorite movies. And so, yeah, in True Romance, there's a couple of scenes where you can clearly see the bottle of Miller Genuine Draft, which was pretty hot in 1994. Was it 4?
Yeah, 94. No, 93.
93.
93.
Look it up. We're recording now.
It's 93. It's 1993. Trust me. Now, here is the funny thing about this. And I might mention it several times in today's show.
Yeah.
But if we really wanted to pair a Tarantino script about criminals on the run to pair with Bonnie and Clyde, it actually isn't True Romance. Natural Born Killers would have been a far better pairing. But I think you and I just love True Romance so badly. We fought to get this episode. And I just, off the top of my head, instead of like picking Bonnie and Clyde and trying to find a movie to pair with it, we went with True Romance and tried to find a movie that paired with that. So it's.
I feel like I need to apologize, and I'll probably do this on the other episodes I'm editing. Apologize first of all to my brother for it's taken forever getting things edited. We've mentioned in the. I don't even know if any of our listeners have heard, because we haven't put anything on social media or anything. We kind of fell off the grid, but it's because you had a big building project. You still have a big building project going on, I think, but you got your studio done. We had a huge move. We moved in April, and it's just been nuts trying to get everything situated with contractors and things that need to be fixed up in this house. And so we're finally now the date is June. It's in June. It's Father's Day. The weather's great. And the last week, it was like we were ready to record, and I had to remind my brother about my boat policy, about boat weather.
I think that was the last 2 weeks, wasn't it?
Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, when the weather's nice in Michigan, you drop everything and you go on the water. I mean,
we got to figure out how to do these recordings while you're on your boat.
Well, it's not that would be awesome. It's not like California where every day is sunshine and
it's true. It's 91 today.
So apologize for the delays, but it's summer. I mean, we've gone through this in the past where, the summer schedule. Last year I did a lot better though. We were able to bank some and then continually get them out on schedule. But it's just been.
I think we had more in the can.
Yeah, with the moves, though, I mean, I didn't even have an office to work in, and so, but things are starting to come together. We both have been dying to do this episode.
Yes. So
but today, it's happy hour. So let's...
Today is definitely happy hour, and I am preparing. Today, I'm doing more than just drinking my usual lightsabers. I have a treat today. Glass.
Uh-oh.
Ice bucket. Can you hear all this?
Oh, yeah. See the ice going in the glass.
Hang on. I should have had an ice scooper. That's enough. All right. Next. Tequila.
Oh.
Now, this is pertinent to kind of both movies. Bonnie and Clyde takes place in the South. And although it's multi-state...
Yeah, can we talk about their accents?
Tequila is a sort of a southern state kind of drink, I think.
Can we talk about their accents?
We'll get to the accents.
It was so bad.
And then Bonnie and True Romance ends in Mexico. So tequila is the drink of the day, but It's not just your regular old margarita. I have here. Hang on.
Oh, no. What is that?
It's not fentanyl. Don't worry.
Is that red dye number 5?
It's 1 red dot and 1 violet dot. Now, I have to tell you how many concoctions of these, how much of these I had to drink over the last few weeks to get the color scheme correct. Because here's what we're going to do. In honor mostly of True Romance.
The purple Cadillac.
I'm going to do my best Christopher Walken. Clarence's purple Cadillac.
Nice.
So
pretty good.
Yeah, it's as close as I could get, man. I drank probably 40 margaritas over the last 3 weeks, mixing all different colors and trying to get the color scheme right. This is the best I could get, and it's you know what? I think I was supposed to do 2 drops of violet, I think. Well, in the next one, I'll do 2 drops of violet, because there is going to be a next one. This is in honor of Clarence's purple Cadillac. I'm going to call this my Clarencita.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. So, yeah, I was going to mention in True Romance, there's a scene where Floyd, played by Brad Pitt, asks his roommates to get some beers. I think he asks for Miller Genuine Draft.
I know he just says beer.
He just says beer? Because he had a Miller Genuine Draft.
They're definitely all over the movie.
Yeah. So they got a check from Miller.
There's something else. There's something else that's all over the movie. There's something else that's all over the movie. No, Miller Coors.
Oh,
company.
okay, yeah.
So I do have my lightsabers, though. If I have to break out of the margaritas later, I do have my tall cans. So there is something else other than Miller Genuine Draft that's all over True Romance, but we'll get to it. It's a nice little thing you see in just about every scene. Not every scene, but definitely scenes that take place in people's houses.
Yeah.
But okay. So let's start with Bonnie and Clyde.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you the specs first before we talk about the first time we ever seen it. So it's 1967, directed by Arthur Penn, written by David Newman and Robert Benton, with some script consulting by Robert Towne, which is interesting because Towne wasn't huge yet. He didn't get huge until he did Chinatown. He was still a known writer in Hollywood, but Chinatown was definitely the crown and the jewel in his crown. This is actually based on a real-life true story. And the movie's a running time of 1 hour, 51 minutes, had a budget of $2.5 million, which, adjusting for inflation today, is still only about $23 million by today's numbers.
Yeah, not much.
Which is still, still would be considered a very low-budget film. It was released on August 14th, 1967, and went on to make $50.7 million, which is $474 million by today's numbers. Wow. So even if you look at that, that's still a huge hit.
Oh yeah.
In any era. It's also interesting to note that it bombed in its first release.
Really?
And then they pulled it. And then I can't remember what happened, but they decided. Oh, I guess it was big. So here's what happened. They released it in the States. It bombed for like a couple weeks. They pulled it. They released it in Europe, and it killed. And then all of a sudden, everyone was like, "Hey, what's this movie that's going on in Europe? We got it. Why isn't it being released here in the States?" And the Warner Brothers was like, "We did release it, but okay, we'll release it again." And then it took off. Wow. It had to be huge in Europe first to get the word of buzz going, I guess.
That's pretty weird.
It ended up coming in at 5th at the box office behind The Graduate, The Jungle Book, a reissue of Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind still finished 3rd that year. And Guess Who's Coming to Dinner?
So wait a minute. So when they released it, do you know where they released it? I'm wondering if they did this massive push in the South, and they were probably like, those accents suck.
Maybe. I don't remember. I'd have to research that. But I know that they released it, then pulled it, and then released it again.
That's funny.
It did garner 10 Oscar nominations, including 2 in the same category. Both Gene Hackman and Michael J. Pollard in the Best Supporting Actor category. Neither won. It won only 2 Oscars. Best Supporting Actress, Estelle Parsons, and the cinematography by Burnett Gouffre. It stars Warren Beatty, a young Warren Beatty as Clyde Barrow, Faye Dunaway as Bonnie Parker, Michael J. Pollard as C.W. Moss, Gene Hackman as Buck Barrow, Estelle Parsons as Blanche Barrow, and Denver Pyle as Frank Hamer. Also, you probably noticed Gene Wilder in his first film appearance.
That was his first film?
His first film, playing Eugene.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to that too, but terrible acting on his part. I don't know how he ended up making a huge career because his acting in this is so bad. But maybe it was done like that on purpose. I don't know.
There is a lot about the acting. Oh my gosh.
So I did like the leads, and I liked Hackman. I always like Hackman. Hackman's always good.
Yeah.
And I did like the leads. They were charismatic.
Can we talk about when Warren Beatty's shooting his guns for the first time I saw him shooting, he's like shooting from the hip. I'm like, come on, man. It was so fake. It was over the top.
But he was right on. Like he was
But come on, man.
And actually, I was going to save it for later, but one of my favorite lines in the movie is where he's shooting all those bottles. And Bonnie goes, "Wow, you're good." And he goes, "I'm not good. I'm the best." Like he's offended that she would even say good.
Right.
Okay, so when was the first time you ever saw this movie?
When I was getting ready for this podcast. That was the first time, yeah.
And what'd you think?
I mean,
it's worth
the
watching, things you've already
but,
shit on.
Yeah, it's worth watching, but I totally was just laughing at the accents and like it was kind of, to me it was almost silly. But it got real. I mean, because they start killing people, and then I remember reading, finding out how much of it was actually true. And it's like 5% or something is actually true. But the some of the critical stats, though, I think they said that the number of bodies, that's accurate.
Yeah.
So a lot of the storyline they just kind of made up,
And how they went out was real too. Like that's how they died.
That part was real too. The ambush, yeah. So
I first saw this in college. I took a films of the 60s class, and it had a lot of great movies. In fact, it was the class I took in college that got me into Bob Dylan, because there was a documentary on Bob Dylan that I saw there, and I just was all in at that point. Started buying a bunch of Bob Dylan albums and everything. But one of the movies they showed in that class was Bonnie and Clyde. They talked a lot about how groundbreaking it was, because up until this movie, there wasn't a lot of violence shown in films, particularly shooting up of bodies. We look at it today, and like you said, it comes off kind of silly, but think about how desensitized we are to movie violence.
Right.
Everything we've seen. But back in 1967, this movie was a fucking shocker, man. People were walking out of that today, I don't know. I can't even think of a movie today that would shock people as far as violence.
Probably Saw 8 or whatever.
Yeah, like people. Yeah, I mean, and imagine Saw 8 being nominated for 10 Oscars. Right? So this was really groundbreaking at the time. I loved it the first time I saw it. I hadn't seen it since college. But when we decided to do it for the podcast, I actually bought it on Blu-ray to watch it again. And I noticed a little bit more now, being so much older, a little bit more film educated. It's shot so much like how the French films used to be shot. A lot of the close-ups, like particularly in the first 5 minutes of the movie, there's a lot of close-ups of Faye Dunaway's face and her eyes. And, that's a lot of how those French films were made back then. And that kind of caught my attention. It's like, wow, this is really shot interestingly. There's a lot of sexual innuendo, particularly in the first, 5-10 minutes, where he's holding his gun between his legs and she's like stroking the nozzle of it. The way she's like drinking from the Coke bottle, with her lips and her tongue and all that shit.
Well, and wasn't it the opening scene when she meets him? She's naked upstairs, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And the curtains are kind of covering her, but and that had to be racy for the time.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Right? Definitely. So yeah, second or third viewings now, so many years later, it's lost, I think, its impact. But make no mistake, for 1967, this was one of the biggest movies of the year. All right, log me.
Oh, crap, I'm not prepared. Pause. Bored waitress Bonnie Parker falls in love with an ex-con named Clyde Barrow, and together they start a violent crime spree through the country, stealing cars and robbing banks. Didn't even mention the murders, but
Right. Well, but this is interesting. So this is going to really play a part with our breakdowns that we normally do. For those of you that have heard our show before, we pull a lot from Blake Snyder's Save the Cat sort of beats. You'll recognize those names as we use the beat names. Often we'll also talk about stuff from Sid Field and Robert McGee, but a lot of times it's mostly Blake Snyder driven. If you're a beginning writer and you haven't read the Save the Cat trilogy of books by Blake Snyder, I highly recommend you do so. But that's where we're pulling from. And it's hard. And some movies is so easy to break down with the beats. Some of them are a little bit more difficult. And you'd think, like, it's hard to depict an act one in this movie. Mm-hmm. They meet so early, and they're into each other so early. And you're like, well, where do we actually jump into act two? But it's really, you look no further than the log line, and we'll do the same thing with True Romance. The log line kind of tells you when the story gets moving. When they say start a violent crime spree, that's pretty much your act two.
Yeah.
So let's get there. So a couple of side notes on the beats. We talked a lot in the past about flat arcs, where the lead characters, the protagonists, they don't really change much. Mm-hmm. They kind of make the same choices at the end that they would at the beginning, where they themselves don't necessarily learn any lesson. It just seems like maybe the world around them has changed a bit, or how people see them has changed, but they themselves really hasn't changed much. An argument can be made that both Bonnie and Clyde are flat arcs because they pretty much know what they want right off the bat in the beginning. They don't seem to learn any specific lesson necessarily, right. At least not one that they didn't already know. I mean, we can lay out pretty much a clear theme for Bonnie. I think her theme is pretty clear, and Clyde gives it to her. We'll get to that when we get the theme stated. But I think if there's an arc at all, it's that the level of notoriety and infamy that, perhaps that they were seeking, I don't think that they anticipated that their names would last forever, And that's sort of like, we talked a little bit about it in the Hoffa episode that we did, right? Where the tweaks that we would have made at the end had we made the movie speak more to, James R's sort of legacy and that his name would live forever. I don't know if he ever really figured that. Mm-hmm. Bonnie and Clyde, that might be part of their arc at all. If there is an arc, which isn't much of one, like I said, it's pretty flat. But if there's an argument to be made at all, it's possibly that they achieved the level of notoriety that we're still talking about them today, and not just because a movie was made, like I said, they're based on real life people. All right, so opening image. We get photos of our criminals in their youth over the opening credits, and this is going to be an interesting contrast to the ending, but it pretty much sets up that they're virtual nobodies, right? And that's where I think the flip comes at the closing image, because by the time it's over, they're not virtual nobodies anymore. But, okay, so inciting incident. So, me, I've been kind of working on this 4-point push of mine. I've been trying to perfect it. For those of you that don't know, the 4-point push is not part of Blake Snyder's beats, but the beats themselves are. Very often you'll see where movies go they jump to the second act without much of a push, right? Like there might be one catalyst and then boom, you're in the second act. Rarely does it work. The one example I always use where it does work is Raiders. Raiders of the Lost Ark. There are no inciting incidents. There is no debates. There's just, he gets the visit from the government guys that say, we need you to go look for the Ark. And then boom, we're in Act 2 and he's going after the Ark. Like they didn't have to convince him. There was no debate.
And I guess because it works for that movie because part of the character development of Indiana Jones is that you learn that he's this person that he's passionate to find these artifacts, right?
Yeah,
and he's
absolutely.
So he didn't need much of a push, but that was part of his character, development, so to speak.
Yeah, sure,
right?
sure.
So.
But that's a rare example where you can have basically one catalyst and that starts the whole thing. If there was an inciting incident at all, you might say, well, Belloc is introduced in the first scene, but that's not really an inciting incident that has anything to do with the Ark.
Right.
But that's an example of a movie where it works. So many other movies it doesn't work, right? You need, I think what Blake Snyder used to write in his books is that the more the better, right? The more things, the more beats that happen to force your protagonist into Act 2, the better, because let's be honest, usually, not always, but usually your protagonist doesn't want the upside down world, right? They like where their life is, and they don't want to go into the second act where everything's all upside down and their world is completely changing. Usually that's what drives arc. But in movies like this, Bonnie and Clyde, whether it's a flat arc, they already know what they want. They can't wait to jump into Act 2. But there's still some stuff that has to happen. So they still do hit some beats. So the inciting incident, the first one of the 4-point push, Bonnie, of course, meets Clyde in the first 4 minutes of the film. She catches him trying to steal her mother's car. And the reason that's the inciting incident is because you don't have a story without this, right? It's the first hint that Bonnie's boring world is about to change.
Right.
Catalyst. 8 minutes in, the second point of the 4-point push, Clyde proves himself to Bonnie and robs the grocery store. It's also their actual first introductions as we are set in motions when they actually tell each other their last names. They haven't really even, go for a walk and he tells her where he's from and he says that he's a criminal and she dares him to prove it and he does. They don't even really know each other yet. But we're not quite in Act 2 yet because remember, what did the log line say? Starting a violent crime spree through the country. That hasn't happened yet. Just because he robbed a grocery store, well, that ain't really shit, right? So we're not in Act 2 yet. By the way, and I mentioned this already, there's a lot of sexual undertones that Arthur Penn shoots in these scenes. Gun between his legs, the Coke bottle, all that stuff. Okay, point 3 of the 4-point push is the debate. Here is where the structure gets interesting. I think, this is just my opinion, but I think we have a very long debate here because Clyde tries to show off and desperately trying to coerce Bonnie into following him. At the 10-minute mark, we learn that Clyde isn't much of a lover. And by the way, this will serve as a rule of 3 later. We've talked about rule of 3. By the time people are listening to this, they will already hopefully have listened to Raising Fargo where we break down the rule of 3. But he intrigues her desire to break free from her boring life. Theme stated at the 12-minute mark, Clyde suggests he knows all about Bonnie's boring and mundane life and ends his speech to her by saying, and this is a quote, "Now when and how am I ever going to get away from this? And now you know." End quote. So, he's trying to do it from her point of view that she's, goes home and thinks about this and he's giving her a chance to break free from her boring life, and that seals it for her, right? She's ready to see more about what Clyde can provide, right? She's already kind of wanting to get out of this boring life that she has. So more debate. We're still not technically into Act 2 yet because while Bonnie might seem like she's all in on this upside down world, she isn't because she can always change her mind and go back home, right? The second they shoot somebody in the face, you're in now. You're in. There is no going home now. Now you're wanted. At this point, she's not wanted. She's not an accessory to anything but a grocery store, stick up. She can always change her mind and go home. Clyde certainly isn't in the upside down world yet because this is his world. He hasn't really changed much yet either. He's already been a criminal. We know he's a criminal. So I wouldn't say that we're yet in Act 2. So that's why I said that it's interesting. This seems to have a long debate segment in the first act. He has to impress her with a little target practice. That's the one where she says, he says, I'm not good. I'm the best. There's a nice little save the cat moment too, around about 13 minutes in. Now, again, Save the Cat, which is not just the name of Blake Snyder's books, but it's a beat. It's an entity. What the Save the Cat actually means is your protagonist, particularly an unlikable one, needs to do something in the beginning of the film that makes the audience want to root for them, right? It's broken down more into rooting resumes, all the things that people can do to root for a character, right? There's always examples. I love the one that Blake Snyder mentions in the movie Sea of Love with Al Pacino. That's kind of a long one. I don't want to get into it now, but little quick ones. Rocky, right? In the beginning of Rocky, we see Rocky go to a bar and he sees a bum on the steps and it's cold outside. It's Philadelphia in the wintertime. He picks him up and carries him into the bar and puts him into a bar seat. You know what I mean? Just something that's, this is a good guy. He does something good. He does something nice. So Clyde has one of these. 13 minutes in, he meets Otis and Davis, and he because they're firing off the bullets and it attracts their attention. They're at the house that the bank had taken from Otis and Davis, and they're obviously upset about it. They let them they give them their guns and they let them take a few shots at the house and shoot the windows out. So it's a nice little moment of, and that kind of sets another tone too about this movie really plays on Depression era, right? And how they're almost like Robin Hoods in a way. It's not, well, they're not Robin Hood stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Bonnie and Clyde's crew never gave to the poor, but they were almost heroes to the poor, you know, because they were anti-establishment, you know, anti-government, anti-everything. So they were heroes to all these people in the Depression era that were poor, broke, out of jobs, losing their homes. So that kind of sets that up. So these debate moments for Bonnie continue as Clyde tries to rob a defunct bank. The grocery stick-up that goes wrong where the guy starts to attack Clyde, and that's where they meet C.W. Moss, who is there to fix up their car, but they invite him to come along on their little, you know, to create a gang. The debunked bank robbery scene reminded me of a 1986 comedy called Tough Guys with Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster, where they're these old guys that get released from prison for robbing a bank like 30 years ago. And they decide, like this, they decide to kind of get back into being criminals again. So they rob an armored car, and the only thing in it is a roll of quarters. There was no money in it. So, like, when I saw this scene, I was like, oh, I wonder if 1986's Tough Guys got that from this.
That's funny.
Right? Where he tries to prove himself again about being a badass criminal, and he robs a bank, and there's no money in it.
I vaguely remember that.
So, yeah. So I was when I saw that, I wondered if Tough Guys was playing an homage to Bonnie and Clyde. All right. So now we're going to get into our break into two, which is the fourth point of the 4-point push. 26 minutes in, when CW helps them rob a bank, a real bank this time, it results in Clyde killing a man. The reason why I think this beat is the break into two, because now your violent crime spree has started. Now they're all on the run. Right. Even the ones that didn't pull the trigger are now accessories to murder.
Yep.
So now none of them can go back, right? And this is Clyde's first time killing a man. So it's big for him too. Now it's his upside down world as well.
Yeah.
Right? So now the world for all of them have flipped. They're now officially in Act 2. And immediately after that, you know, we start the fun and games. Clyde realizes the gravity of his new world as he interrogates a saddened CW in the movie theater. He's basically making him cry for parking the fucking car. Why did you park the car? In the middle of a bank robbery, and you parked the car. Also in the hotel room, there's another failed sexual encounter between Bonnie and Clyde. This time, Clyde initiates it, but he ends it quick when he realizes, you know, it ain't working out. He's not getting stiffy, you know. So this is the second of the rule of three. So the first time Bonnie initiated it, and he stopped it because he's impotent, basically. Second time he initiates it because he's still on kind of like a high now that they're on the run and they killed somebody, and he tries to initiate this and it doesn't work out, so he ends it then too. So that's the second time. There'll be a third time later. B story. So we always talk about the B story. When does the B story generally come in? About a half hour in, right? Usually about 30 minutes in. Like 30 minutes in, we see Hooper and Jaws, right?
Sometimes it depends on the length of the film, though, but still.
Yeah, sure. But in a basic film, 30 minutes into Legally Blonde, right, we meet Jennifer Coolidge's character, right?
Yes,
so usually about a half hour in. At the 34-minute mark of this film, Clyde's brother Buck arrives with his new wife, Blanche. And I may have to say, God, I know I realized it when I saw it however many years ago in college. I definitely felt it this time. She might be the most annoying person in the film. And it's sad because it's filled with such intriguing people.
Yeah.
She is the worst one. She is so fucking annoying. And she wins an Oscar for it. So apparently it worked. It worked, apparently. However, I feel ironically, this is my opinion, that Blanche serves as the B story, because what does the B story do, right? The B story drives the protagonist to their spiritual goal. And while we've already argued to the death that these two probably have flat arcs and there's no spiritual goal for them to learn, she is very important to driving them to the closing of this film, right? She drives them to their end, so to speak. It's really on her.
Right.
All right, so then we have some more fun and games. Grocery delivery boy suspiciously looks at the house, which causes a police shootout, because, of course, he's going to go back and tell them we think it's the Barrow Gang, which by now they're the Barrow Gang, and they're,
right.
they're right. So now we're fully on in Act 2. And this one, Buck even tells Blanche she screwed up when they're making their getaway. Also, later in this segment, we meet Ranger Captain Frank Hamer. They take him sort of pseudo hostage just so they can embarrass him by taking pictures with him. Mm-hmm. He spits in Bonnie's face, and he's another one that's going to become way more important later. Midpoint scene around the 57-minute mark, which is again pretty standard. It's pretty much exactly the middle of an hour and 51-minute film. The Barrow Gang robs the bank, and the media hype is splashed across the newspapers. They rob another bank, and the media hype is all over the newspapers. So this is the first, real, I don't want to say it's the first fame, but it's where Bonnie and Clyde are starting to read about themselves in the paper more, right? And this is the fame that they wanted. Along with the picture that they took of Frank Hamer, that gets published too. They're celebrities, right? So that's about achieving as much as a tangible goal as you can get halfway through the film. We always say the tangible goal you achieve at the midpoint. Well, fame is what they wanted. They got it at the midpoint. Bad guys closing in. The second half of the film starts. Happiness in paradise doesn't last long as Blanche wants her share, and she pisses off Bonnie. Needing a new car, they try to steal, then kidnap the car's owners, Eugene and Velma, Gene Wilder's first appearance. And again, you got if you haven't seen this movie, you gotta watch it. One of the things to look for is how novice Wilder was at acting at this point. Again, unless it was Arthur Penn's intention and his direction to do it that way, he at one point I even think he looks at the camera and he's like, oh, I'm so mad right now. Oh, I really want to get my hands on these guys, for stealing his car. It's so bad. I don't believe him at all.
Right.
This is not. But it's fun and it's comical. So maybe it was done on purpose. I don't know.
Yeah, I felt like that through a lot of this movie. It was fun to watch though because of that.
Their joyride turns sour as Bonnie and Eugene reveal. It turns sour for Bonnie when Eugene reveals that he works as an undertaker. That's sort of like reality crashing into this moment. She demands the car stop. They kick him out. It's a shift in tone and sadness for Bonnie. So much so the next morning she runs away. They do catch up with her. She tells Clyde that she wants to see her mother again because now she's fearing death, right?
Right.
It's kind of like in Barbie, the beginning of Barbie, when she's like, does any of you guys think about dying? And the whole world just stops and they're like, what? Because that's the first hint that she's starting to transition, right? Same thing here for Bonnie. It's been all fun, right? It's been a barrel laughs, other than not getting as much dick as she's wanted. From Clyde for obvious reasons on Clyde's part. Other than that, this has been a hell of a ride so far.
So what do you mean by obvious reasons? So I read some trivia about that because there's debate on whether or not what his problem was. Was he gay? Was he just impotent? And there's I don't know if that anyone really knows.
They don't. Right. What I looked up is they never really knew. Arthur Penn and Beatty got together when they were creating the script. Mm-hmm. They made the decision that they didn't want to make him gay. They just wanted to. I mean, again, this is 1967. Warren Beatty is
I mean, if they knew he was and they didn't, I got a problem with that. But they don't. Yeah, but even
in 1967, that's the norm. You know what I mean? Yeah. Where doubtful somebody in Beatty's position would want. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's not a good look. But for 1967, that would have been the only look, right?
Yeah.
Today, I would think it would be even worse by today's standards. That if you were doing a real life movie about, let's say you were gonna, Sean Penn won an Oscar for playing Harvey Milk. What if you redid Milk, and you cast a guy playing him straight?
Yeah. That's what I mean.
Right, but still, people would be like, "What the fuck, dude?" What? That'd be like redoing Malcolm X and making the dude white.
Damn.
People would be like, "Okay, bad casting, bad decision." But 1967. But you're right; they didn't even really know. Nobody's really known the real Clyde Barrow if he was impotent, if he was gay. The only thing they knew is that there was sexual tension between him and Bonnie that they didn't get it on.
Right.
So from what I read, Arthur Penn and Beatty decided to just make him impotent. So that was going to be the driving force on the sexual tension between the two. But as I was saying, up until this point, like the crime spree has been fun for Bonnie. Like, this is great to get out of her boring waitress life.
Yeah.
Until she hears that Gene Wilder's character is an undertaker, all of a sudden it's like the world just crashes down on her. Like, we're going to die someday.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is going to only end in death. So she realizes at that moment, like, I want to see my mom again. I want to see my mom one last time. At the 1 hour... Well,
hold on really quick before you move on. Could you imagine a 2025 remake of Bonnie and Clyde where they do take liberties with his sexuality just to... Because no one knows, and they would just do the opposite of what was originally done, making him impotent. So I could see it. I could see someone doing that,
like making him gay.
Yeah, but I mean, but redoing the movie and making it not as cheesy. You know what I mean? And just making a real drama about him.
Obviously, this is a movie that's ripe for a remake, even though we've seen Lovers on the Run movies before. If they were going to remake it and call it Bonnie and Clyde, I think it would have some intrigue to it.
Yeah, for sure.
But how are you going to, like I said, its impact was groundbreaking as far as violence. We've seen it all. Like, what would they possibly do? You know what I mean? Like, Natural Born Killers is pretty much a Bonnie and Clyde remake.
I know, but they did it with a Star is Born, right? I mean, they keep remaking that damn movie. They do,
yeah. That movie gets remade like every 15, 20 years. Like, it's ridiculous. That movie's been made 4 times.
Yeah, Bradley Cooper play Clyde.
Yeah. But, yeah, like we talked about it on the...
Lady Gaga could be Bonnie.
the war episode we did, right?
I'd go see that.
All Quiet on the Western Front is the war version of A Star is Born, because that one's also been remade like 4 or 5 times. So yeah, we could start doing that with Bonnie and Clyde. Just every 20 years we remake another one.
It's been more than 20 years though.
It's definitely due for a remake. And I'm not condoning remakes, by the way. I'm not sitting there saying I want that to happen. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that's actually kind of shocking when you think about Hollywood and.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's such a popular story. I mean, people, even if you've never seen the movie, you've heard of Bonnie and Clyde.
Well, like I said, yeah, exactly. And we've seen a lot of Lovers on the Run movies before. So maybe Hollywood's just like, been there, done that. You know what I mean? Maybe we haven't remade Bonnie and Clyde, per se, but we've done movies like that enough. So I don't know. Well,
if you're an aspiring writer and producer and... Take this one on.
Don't start off by doing a remake. That would be my suggestion. Don't listen to my brother on that one. All right.
Maybe all you want to do is remakes, reimaginings.
Well, at least you won't be unoriginal. All right. At the 1 hour, 9-minute mark, there is a family reunion of sorts for the Barrow gang and Bonnie's family. Again, mostly they're treated like celebrities by these people, right? The poor, downtrodden, Depression era folks. Right. Although Mama Parker isn't exactly happy about Clyde crashing into her daughter's life.
Right.
She knows what that's going to mean eventually in the end.
You can tell she was not thrilled with the whole situation.
She's not having it.
I felt that as a parent. I was like, oh my God.
And while Bonnie is still depressed when they get back to the cabin, Blanche and CW get noticed by a cop in town while they're buying food. This, of course, leads to yet another shootout, and this one is a big one. Buck takes a round in the side of the head, and it's going to prove to hinder the group forever. That leads us to our all is lost. The next morning, at the 1 hour, 24-minute mark, Blanche sustained wounds to her eyes as well. Buck dies, and while surrounded by cops, Blanche, about to fulfill her role as the B story that will lead to the protagonists and their spiritual end, she gets arrested. So Blanche is arrested and Buck is dead. Bonnie and Clyde, though both wounded, and CW, they find a hole and they slip through to get away from the cops. Dark night of the soul. Out of resources and options, what's left of the Barrow gang goes to an Old West version of Skid Row, where all the poor folks are just sort of like, crippled together in this Depression era, sort of like I said, it's like the equivalent of LA's Skid Row, but it's not under freeways or on, anything. It's just out in the middle of nowhere. And it's everybody just trying to make, ways to get by, food, clothing, food, water. But again, when they arrive, they're like celebrities. So these people that have virtually nothing are giving them stuff. They're giving them food. They're giving them water. They're giving them soup.
Yeah.
When CW gets the soup from one of them, he smiles, and realizes at this point that they need more help, right? So he makes the decision at the 1 hour and 30-minute mark that CW is going to take the gang to Dad's house. And that's Malcolm Moss, his father, who isn't happy about all of this, but he agrees to look after them. So now we're going to break into 3 as the A and B stories collide as Hamer questions a wounded Blanche and gets CW's name. That was really all he needed to find them, right? Because they know Malcolm. They know the father. This is going to lead to the 5-point finale. Now, before I get to my 5-point finale, or Blake Snyder's 5-point finale, I should say, side note, this 5-point finale is unique in the way that it almost completely goes away from the point of view of Bonnie and Clyde that we've done the whole time, and almost becomes from the point of view of the cops. It's almost, you could argue, the cops' 5-point finale. And it's from the cops and Malcolm's
and
POV.
How else would we know what the end of the story was from the cops' point of view, right?
Right. So I think that's why it does this shift, because if you stay from the point of view of Bonnie and Clyde, the ending is too abrupt. It doesn't make much sense. You don't know how or why it happened, and the movie would be over.
Right.
They have to flip it in the third act to almost give the audience sort of like that superior position to where they know things that Bonnie and Clyde don't know. Right?
Yeah.
So we'll do it from that point of view. So, all right, 5 points. Number 1, gathering the team. At the 1 hour, 40-minute mark, Malcolm meets and makes a deal with Hamer. Interestingly, in their own gathering the team kind of way, Bonnie and Clyde finally fuck.
Gathering the team.
I put that under gathering the team. He finally gets enough of a Woody down there to get his first boning. It's Bonnie's first boning with Clyde. And this is the final move of the 3-point, right? Of the rule of 3. This was the third one. The third one is a success, whereas the previous 2 were failures. So Clyde gathered his billions of team.
What did he say about it? He even made mention of the fact that he did the deed or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, he's fucking patting himself on the back, man. He loved it. And who doesn't love it the first time you fuck, right? Even if it's a terrible experience, you're like, I fucked. No matter what happens to me the rest of my life, I'm a fucker. I'm a fucker now. Right? Like, maybe that's just a guy's point of view. I don't know if women, fair enough. I don't know if women feel that way. But let me tell you how dudes feel. Again, even if it was a terrible experience, and you nutted like in 12 seconds or whatever, you go home that day and you're like, I fucked. How many of my friends have fucked? I don't know, but I have. And that's all that matters at that point.
I don't think I can use any of that as our intro, our comic intro. It's just too, oh my God.
Okay, hang on. I need a refill here.
I'm leaving it in the podcast, so because this is 100% genuine.
This is gold. It's gold, Jerry. It's gold. All right, hang on. I need to know. Let's see if I have enough.
Jerome.
Yeah, I'm gonna pour. This might be the last of my tequila in this bottle.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I may have to open a new bottle.
Yeah, I think you may.
I'll do that later. I finished it up here. Now I'm going to try. I don't know if I stepped too far away from the thing there. I am going to try and do what I said. Look at that. It was the last of my sweet and sour mixer. Now, I did have another one in case I was going to keep going.
You are prepared.
I am very prepared. All right. So what did I say? The concoction was 1 drop red.
Yeah, do 2 blue.
Try 2. Violet.
Violet. Well, try 2 of those.
Oh, shit. I think I did 3. It sort of sprayed out of me. Much like Clyde's gathering of the team. Oh, yeah. Yep, this one's going to be nice and more purple.
More purple?
Yeah. If I do it just purple, it's too purpley.
Yeah.
Clarence's Cadillac in True Romance has a tint of red to it.
It's almost pinkish.
Yeah,
pinkish
well, like
purple. Yeah.
And that's the funny thing is that Elvis's car was a pink Cadillac. Didn't he write a song about it? So it's supposed to be pink, but his is a little purplish.
Let's see it. Oh, yeah, that's more purple. There you go.
There you go. There we go. Nice. So it was 2 drops. All right. So to continue the 5-point finale, the next part is execution of the plan. CW does as he's told and stays away. Oh, I kind of glossed over that part. Malcolm tells his son to stay away from Bonnie and Clyde when they get into town. He's got something planned. Execution of the plan. CW does as he's told. He stays away. Bonnie and Clyde flee the town when they see the cops are putting the pressure on. They leave without CW. They're just figuring out he'll make it back on his own. And they see Malcolm on the side of the road, and they pull over to help him. After all, they know who Malcolm is, and he'd help them, so why not help him? Now they're out in the open and exposed. High tower surprise. Innocent bystanders put Malcolm's plan in jeopardy as they roll up on the scene when it's about to go down. That's, again, now we're doing it from the point of view of Malcolm, right? Yep. His whole plan is working out until he sees innocent bystanders coming. And he's like, shit, what are we going to do? Dig down deep. Malcolm's forced to make quick thinking decision. And as he looks into the bushes where the cops are, and he gives them the it's now or never look, and then he dives under the car for cover. 5, execution of the new plan. The cops come out and they start firing. There's first of all, a nice little editing moment where Clyde sees what's going on. Yeah. And he looks at Bonnie and she looks at him and he looks at her. And it was, it's a lot of quick edit cuts, but it's almost this moment of they know they're dead. Right. And that's the execution of the plan. The cops come out with their machine guns and they start firing like crazy and they gun them down in a bloody massacre, which again did happen in real life. That is really how they got them. Although I think in real life she was eating a sandwich, I think they said. She was eating a sandwich and they shot her while she was eating a sandwich.
Wow.
Fucking ruthless. At least let her finish the goddamn sandwich. All right. So the crime spree is now officially over. So again, okay, notes on the goals. As we mentioned, right, there's a strong argument to be made for the flat arc. I don't really know. I mean, unless you disagree, I realize on these shows, I always say things that this is how it is. But really, film is very, a nice conversation piece.
Yeah, we have argued on some character points and stuff. I remember one with Robin Williams or something, but I don't know. I don't see it on this one.
Not much of an arc, right? No. Like, they don't really learn anything.
Right.
If they were going to learn anything, it was within the last few seconds, and what they learned is we're fucking dead, right? Like, our plan
it's one of those,
here.
I mean, it's based on a true story. So when it's based on a true story, I don't know. I mean, how would you have written it to give them an arc where they learn something? Maybe they learn something right before the trigger is pulled or something. I don't know. It's hard to do, though. It's like, I mean, because they're just really making up a lot of this story. So they could have made it. Why not give it a good character arc?
I mean, you could argue that if there was the flat arc, it's mostly Clyde's. Bonnie's actually has an arc. She starts as a bored waitress, right? Mm-hmm. And she dreams of an exciting life. And she gets that at the midpoint, right? And the lesson she learns is that kind of life isn't sustainable. And that maybe if she was still just a bored housewife, she'd still be alive. Housewife. Bored waitress. If she was just a bored waitress, she'd still be alive. So if anything, that's her arc, right? I mean, she sends pictures and her poems to the papers, and becomes sort of like a hero to the downtrodden.
Interesting, because, if you made this today, a modern day version of Bonnie and Clyde, she'd be putting it on Instagram. Right? She'd be a viral sensation.
They'd be doing Facebook Live when they robbed banks.
Right, no shit.
And think about
because that kind of shit has happened.
Right, and think about like the hits that it would get on YouTube, right? Mm-hmm. Like it would be it would be huge. So, okay, so media celebrities, again, as I mentioned, one can't help but think that at least part of the inspiration for 2 early Tarantino screenplays, True Romance, which we're going to talk about, and Natural Born Killers. I would be surprised if Tarantino, who worked many years in a video store, probably has seen Bonnie and Clyde a million times, if this wasn't at least a little bit in the back of his mind when he wrote those two. So let's wrap this up with some trivia.
Yeah.
Jack Warner, the head of the Warner Brothers Studios, was having an argument over production with Warren Beatty in his office. I don't know if you're familiar with the Warner Brothers set in Hollywood, in Burbank, but it's got that big water tower that has WB on it.
Right.
So that's outside his window. And while they're arguing over what they want to do with this production, Jack Warner says, "Hey, whose name is on that water tower out there?" To which Beatty replied, "Yeah, my initials."
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
So I thought that was a great story. I think Beatty himself is where I heard that story. He told that story.
Oh, that's
great. When Clyde tells her, this is another interesting part. When he gives the theme stated, when they're in that little diner at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Clyde tells her to change her hairstyle.
Yeah.
Because he, quote unquote, doesn't like that. And she immediately obliges. It was another one of those cringe moments of a man telling a woman what to do.
Yeah.
We talked about it in the Children of a Lesser God episode.
Right? Yeah.
However, on the next viewing, I realized why. I didn't even catch it until I saw it the second time, or rather the third time. Because the first time was in college. Obviously, it went right over my head then. But then watching it for this podcast, I didn't catch it on the first viewing then either until the second viewing. The waitress comes over and she's got the same hairdo. She's got the same hair thing. And when he looks at her, and I caught it on the third viewing.
I didn't catch that either. Wow.
Because of the way he looks at her, and I'm like, why is he looking at her like that? That's kind of weird. And then I realized she has the same hair thing on the side of her head.
Okay.
And Clyde sort of looks at it, and then when she walks away, he looks at Bonnie, who's got the same thing, and he goes, I don't like that. Change that.
Well, and it's still cringy though.
Oh, definitely. He could have said, and again, I don't like to rewrite stuff, but I did it with Hoffa, and I'm going to rewrite this one too. What I would have done is I would have had Bonnie see it.
Right.
And if Bonnie sees it and is like, fuck that, I can't believe I have the same hairdo as that old-ass waitress, and then changes her hair. And then maybe Clyde could be like...
Yeah, that would have had a completely different feel then.
And then Clyde would be like, what are you doing? And she'd just be like, I don't like this hairstyle anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you could have easily have fixed that.
Yeah.
But for 1967, it does come off as a man telling woman what to do. Caveman man
Not
telling
so
woman,
subtly.
I don't like that. Change it. You know?
Right.
So, okay. So, like we already talked about this. The film's brutality changed the landscape for movies. It opened the door to more violent movies that would take over in the 70s, particularly The Godfather in 1972 plays its own little homage of Sonny's death at the toll booth. Getting shot up with a machine gun is an homage to Bonnie and Clyde.
When did Psycho come out?
1960.
What?
7 years before this movie. But
it was that old. Wow.
But that was a different type of violence.
Yeah.
You know, that wasn't gun violence. That was slasher. That definitely, I would think, maybe
Suspense.
you could argue. Yeah, but you could argue that Psycho might have what started slasher movies.
Yeah, sure.
Know?
Yeah. Crazy. We should do that one.
So the argument of trivia there is that if Bonnie and Clyde never gets released, I don't know if Sonny's shooting in The Godfather ever makes it into the film. You know, at least not with that kind of brutality.
Right.
So the real-life Blanche Barrow hated how she was portrayed in the film, as it was an embarrassing characterization. However, director Arthur Penn did that intentionally so that Bonnie Parker would look cooler by comparison. That was a quote by him. Additionally, while there has always been speculation, again, we talked about this already, speculation about Clyde's sexuality. It was Beatty and Penn who decided to make him impotent. They felt it added a far better layer to his personality, especially with the sexual tension with Bonnie. Anything else you got?
No. No. I can't wait to get to the next one. So this was fun. That's where we landed the plane on Bonnie and Clyde. Stay tuned. It won't be long, and we'll have True Romance, Love on the Run Part 2 will be dropped very soon. Again, hit us up on Instagram or Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Chris Wiegand. Go support your local cinema.